thank everyone for coming to this Turn Week event featuring issues of environmental justice and law, climate justice legislation worth singing about, a session that we entitled Law, Law, Law. And I want to thank Zaya Bonamani and Shelby Coyne for being with us tonight to lead this session and really provide the heart of it. And before we begin, I'd like to read a land and a labor acknowledgement. I am Kristen Kusanovich, the director of the tUrn project, which is a climate crisis awareness and action week that happens in October, starting on Indigenous Peoples Day, and it happens in April during Earth Week, every year for this entire decade. So I hope that you can make it to some more events. If you haven't already enjoyed any of the tUrn headliners, we have them all day tomorrow from 8 a.m. to 7:30 p.m. And I'm really glad that you're all here joining us tonight for this one. So, Shelby, So again, welcome to Law, 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 Climate Justice Legislation Worth Singing About with Shelby Coyne, Law 3 graduate student who is presenting on climate law cases that are making a difference in calling out environmental injustices or combating global warming or decelerating ecological collapse. We're interested in everything that's working. And this is moderated by a dear colleague and friend of mine, Zaya Bomani. And I'm going to introduce them a little bit with their bios, but I think you'll see through their framing remarks and their work on these cases so much more about them than I could say in a bio. So Zaya is a civil rights attorney and legal scholar with a focus on environmental justice, reproductive justice, human rights, race, gender, and the law. He teaches environmental law at Santa Clara University and oversees the Law and Advocacy Project of SCU's Environmental Justice and the Common Good Initiative, which fosters university-community partnerships to achieve social and environmental justice in Northern California and beyond. Zaya also founded and currently coordinates the Environmental Justice Committee of the National Lawyers Guild Bay Area chapter for lawyers, law students, and legal workers to provide legal support to the local environmental justice movement. As a scholar activist, Zaya seeks to understand, and may understand, the relationships between the environment, marginalized peoples, and the law in order to effectively and equitably solve the most pressing environmental challenges of our time. His scholarship has been published in the Tulane Journal of Law and Sexuality, Georgetown Journal of Gender and the Law, and Seattle Journal for Social Justice. He earned his BA in History from Stanford University. See that? I can't even say another university's name. From Stanford University, and his JD from Santa Clara Law with certificates in Public International Law with honors and Public Interest and Social Justice Law. Shelby Coyne is passionate about bringing awareness of the climate crisis and the interconnectivity between protecting people and protecting the planet. She has been a headline speaker for Santa Clara University's Climate Crisis Awareness Week tUrn, and she says that she has sharpened her presentation and public speaking skills while advocating for the right to a healthy environment. She works as an environmental justice research assistant and has expanded her understanding of climate justice as a social justice issue, and also the importance of pursuing intersectional environmentalism. She's a great choice for us tonight to be working with Zaya, to be working with me, and she says that she's very eager to continue to pursue environmental justice because of her commitment to working for people and the environment. And I'm very interested in supporting her in her work and allowing tUrn to be a platform for her really great presentations. So with that, I give you Zaya and Shelby, and thank you again for being with us tonight.
Thank you so much, Kristen. So Shelby, I don't know if you want to just put up the slides and get started. Again, my name is Zaya Bomani. I'm really here to support Shelby, who is, as Kristen said, a third-year law student at Santa Clara Law School, doing and will continue to do very amazing work around environmental law and environmental justice. So we'll be guiding us through a couple of cases that are local to California, and just talking about the importance of activism wherever you are and getting involved, and then I'll sort of tie things out, talking about community lawyering and the importance of law in our fight for a more just climate and environment for all people.
Okay, so thank you guys so much for being here. I'm Shelby. I am really excited tonight to talk about some environmental success stories. And in particular, I want to talk about environmental stories that became successful due to environmental advocacy, community lawyering, and all in the face of big industry. And so tonight I'm going to discuss two California environmental success stories. The first is going to be the Erin Brockovich versus PG&E case, which most people are very familiar with because of the movie made, Erin Brockovich, starring Julia Roberts. So if you haven't seen it, maybe rent it after this. But the second case I'm going to present on, or it's actually a rule recently passed by the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, and it requires Bay Area refineries to reduce air pollution. So with that, let's jump right into our first case. Oh, there we go. Okay. So the Erin Brockovich case, the actual title of the case is Anderson versus EPA, and it was filed in 1987. So at the time of this case, Erin Brockovich was a single mom working as a file clerk at a Los Angeles law firm. Together with an attorney she was working with, Ed Mastry, they filed a class action lawsuit against PG&E on behalf of residents of Hinckley, California. Hinckley is a small Southern California community located in the Mojave Desert. So before going into the case a little bit more, we're going to do some background real quick. And so to do that, I'm going to take you back to 1952, when a natural gas compressor station owned by PG&E was built in Hinckley, California. And so this gas compressor station was built as part of a pipeline that delivers natural gas into PG&E's service territories. The pipeline runs from the Texas Panhandle all throughout California, fueling heating systems and power plants. Now, as the natural gas moves through this pipeline, the friction causes it to lose pressure. And so it's compressor stations like the one in Hinckley force the gas back up to a higher pressure, and this facilitates transmission. Now, during this process, water and oil cool down the gas compressor, but in order to prevent rust from corroding these pipes, PG&E uses a corrosion inhibitor, which is called hexavalent chromium, or chromium-6. And PG&E used chromium-6 because it was one of the cheapest and most efficient commercially available corrosion inhibitors. But I want to talk a little more about chromium-6 in particular. Oh, there we go. So there's actually two types of chromium that occur within the environment. The first is trivalent chromium, or chromium-3, which is an essential human nutrient. And then the second is hexavalent chromium, or chromium-6, which is a toxic mineral. So chromium-3 can actually be found in fruits, vegetables, meats, grains, yeast. It is known to enhance insulin, as well as help metabolize carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. Chromium-6, however, as I said, is a toxic mineral. And studies have actually shown that breathing in particles can cause lung cancer. The chemical has also been linked to liver damage, reproductive problems, developmental harm, and it presents greater risks in children and infants, people with poorly functioning livers, as well as those even taking antacids. But because chromium-6 was one of the cheapest and most commercially available, PG&E used chromium-6 from the time that the natural gas compression station opened in 1952, all the way up until 1966. During this time, PG&E workers allegedly disposed of roughly 370 million gallons of chromium-6 tainted water, wastewater, into spreading ponds around Hinckley. And supposedly this C6 contaminated wastewater was supposed to be dredged and disposed of, but because it was dumped into unlined ponds, And due to the porous nature of the desert soil, being in the Mojave Desert, the C6 actually seeped into the soil and it made its way to the groundwater. So throughout this time, residents are becoming increasingly concerned as, they're seeing their community members getting sick. They're seeing family members, children, even household pets are getting sick, and they're not really sure what's going on. But they are extremely skeptical when PG&E starts delivering bottled water to residents. One resident who was part of the lawsuit even recalled calling up PG&E on the phone, asking about their water, and being told that only chromium-3 was in their water. But later, when she called back, a representative told her that there was actually chromium-6 in the water. So residents at this time have no idea really what's going on. And it's during the same time that Erin Brockovich is working at her legal firm in Los Angeles, and she is filing papers for a real estate case, which is against PG&E. And amongst these real estate papers, there's actually blood sampling from the town of Hinckley. And she's really confused on why blood sampling is part of a real estate case, or why are these papers in here? So she does a little bit more digging. She goes to the town of Hinckley, and eventually she uncovers evidence linking a rash of illnesses there in Hinckley to high levels of chromium-6 in the water. And so in 1987, a class action lawsuit was filed for health problems allegedly arising from chromium-6 tainted water. This class action included about 650 plaintiffs from Hinckley, and it was referred to arbitration. According to reports, PG&E was aware of this chromium problem at least since 1965, if not earlier. And they were aware in 1965 because they were getting reports of residents who had concerns over the quality of their well water. However, it wasn't until 1987 that PG&E finally told California Regional Water Quality Control Board that it had contaminated the groundwater. But they alleged that they had only found this problem out just a week before. But most likely PG&E very much was aware of what they were doing long before 1987. And this also likely influenced their decision to settle the case, because in 1996, PG&E settled the case for $333 million, which is the largest settlement of a class action lawsuit in United States history. According to the lawsuit, PG&E would have to cease its use of chromium-6, and it would also have to clean up the groundwater that it contaminated. Now, this process of cleaning up the groundwater could take anywhere from 30 to 50 years. They're currently still in the process of doing this. Unfortunately, by about 2010, the plumes from chromium-6 had still continued to be a problem in Hinckley. And about that time, PG&E began offering to purchase threatened houses and property. And again, they started handing out bottled water to residents. So eventually, most of the town of Hinckley ended up selling their property to PG&E. And unfortunately, today, Hinckley kind of resembles a ghost town. But it's not all bad news, because it's stuff like community advocacy and media coverage that actually forced the California Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment to recommend a public goal limiting the amount of chromium-6 in our drinking water. In 2014, California adopted a legal limit of chromium-6 in our water. The legal limit was 10 parts per billion. But the Superior Court of Sacramento unfortunately did invalidate this standard based on a failure to consider the economic feasibility of complying with the standard. Currently, the maximum contaminant level for chromium-6 in drinking water is set at 50 parts per billion. So there is definitely still a lot of work to be done towards moving towards cleaner drinking water. But this case is still a really good example of how community advocacy, community lawyering, and even the media can really spotlight important environmental issues in our communities. This case is especially important because it shows what a valuable impact community advocacy can have while it's in the face of big industry. So with that, I want to turn to a recent example of community advocacy that was successful in advocating for the Bay Area Air Quality Management District to pass Rule 6.5. There we go. So Rule 6.5, it's also called the Catalytic Cracking Units Rule. And it was originally adopted by the Air District Board of Directors in 2015. The rule, the purpose of the rule is to reduce emissions of particulate matter from petroleum facilities' fluidized catalytic cracking units, which are some of the largest individual sources of particulate matter emissions in the Bay Area. The proposed amendment to this rule would improve public health by requiring Chevron's refinery in Richmond and PBF's energy-owned refinery in Martinez to reduce its particulate matter from their fluidized catalytic cracking units, or FCCUs. So particulate matter, or PM, as I'm going to refer to it, can cause adverse respiratory health effects. Recent studies have linked exposure to PM to a wide variety of cardiovascular diseases, impacts on cognitive health, as well as cancer. This rule would essentially force refineries to cut their PM emissions from FCCUs by implementing wet gas scrubbers. So the purpose of FCCUs is to break down heavy crude oil and turn it into lighter components for products like gasoline. The Air District says that this process, which is part of normal daily operations at many large refineries, emits more particulate matter than any other part of the refining process, and it makes up a significant portion of each plant's total emissions. But implementing wet gas scrubbers can actually capture and remove these pollutants by sending exhaust gas through sprays of scrubbing liquid. The district says that these wet gas scrubbers can significantly reduce PM released into the air by FCCUs. So why were proposals for amendments on this rule even happening? So according to Assembly Bill 617, the Air District sets an expedited schedule for implementing the best available retrofit control technology, or BARC. The expedited BARC schedule adopted by the Air District in 2018 specifically identifies PMs from FCCUs as a key area where BARC controls could have a significant impact. By addressing PM emissions from FCCUs, the proposed amendments to Rule 6.5 follows through on these commitments under AB 617. The proposed amendments are also quote unquote necessary because under the California Health and Safety Standard Code, or just Health and Safety Code, they would help attain and maintain ambient air quality standards. So, okay, a little bit about the procedural history. So in March of 2021, the Air District released a public notice on public hearing. They proposed amendments to Rule 6.5 and released a staff report. They also accepted public comments on all of these materials. On June 2nd, 2021, the Air District Board of Directors initiated a public hearing to consider the adoption of the proposed amendments on Rule 6.5. And then on July 21st, 2001, they continued these public hearings.
Do you mind if I jump in just quickly, just to add a little bit of context as well? So you mentioned AB 617, and so a lot of people who are in this work know what that is, but for those who don't know, AB 617, so AB stands for Assembly Bill, so California's Assembly. 617 was passed in 2017, and the idea was to really combat air pollution in California. California has been a leader for several decades. Actually, before the Federal Clean Air Act, California had taken the initiative to tackle air pollution because places like Los Angeles had very, very bad smog. So AB 617 was passed with the idea to reduce exposure to air pollution and preserve public health. And it spurred a number of different initiatives across the state, including the requirements for the Bay Area Air District to look into how to reduce air pollution emissions, or PM emissions, as Shelby had mentioned, from refineries such as the ones in run by Chevron and PBF.
So I was actually involved in the second round of comments that were presented to the Air District Board of Directors on July 21st. Over the summer, I interned for an environmental nonprofit, San Francisco Baykeeper. And because there were actually so many public comments on the first hearing, the board extended this comment period into July 21st. However, the caveat was that no one at the first hearing would be able to speak at the second hearing. And so another environmental organization, the Sierra Club, reached out to us to see if we would provide comments specifically on the water issue, which I'll go into more detail on later. But just a little bit about the comment process. I gave these comments over Zoom to the Air Board. Originally, I was only given 30 seconds to present comments, but as the issue kind of continued to grow, they extended our time to 3 minutes. I prepped for these comments beforehand. The way I did it was really just taking some statistics about the water facts to bring to the Air Board, and then really presenting as well the mission statement of the group I was working for, which is really about protecting humans and the environment, not one or the other. And so what I wasn't—
And how long did—
Sorry.
Oh, yeah, sorry, go ahead. I was going to ask you about that experience and how that felt when you were presenting in front of the board.
I was a little nervous at first, but I had practiced my comments a lot and I felt really confident in what I was saying. And I was really excited when I was there because I realized not a lot of people were commenting on the water issue. So it felt really cool to be that one of the voices that got to say something about that. But what I really wasn't expecting was there were so many people there that were commenting on behalf of the refineries and in opposition to this rule. I was really blown away by the amount of people that really came out. But in reality, I shouldn't have been that surprised at all, because throughout this whole rule process, the refineries had really been spreading misinformation as part of their own campaign. And it really escalated more so up until the last hearing, where it really seemed like they were doing this last-ditch effort to confuse the politicians. They ultimately really wanted to pass a weaker rule, which would end up being more dangerous, and it would be costly to residents' lives. And so the refineries were spreading this misinformation, even though the amendments to Rule 6.5 improve public health. It saves lives, particularly in environmental justice communities. And it does all this while actually creating jobs. And so because the issue of this rule kind of came down to, on the one hand, Chevron spreading misinformation, and on the other hand, these environmental activists, these community activists pushing for protecting the health of our communities, I'm going to go into some of the arguments that Chevron put forth and why they were actually misleading. So one of the first things that the refineries were arguing was that wet gas scrubbing is unprecedented and will force the refineries to shut down. When in actuality, wet gas scrubbing is already very common. It's used at a majority of US refineries to control FCCUs. Even a majority of PBF's own refineries use these wet gas scrubbers. This rule would actually catch the Bay Area up to places like Texas, who had been using this technology for over 15 years. All the refineries that have wet gas scrubbers that were identified by the district were also still operating profitably. So another argument that the refineries put forth is that the rule would be too costly and it would force them to lay off workers. But in reality, it's actually fairly feasible for these refineries to absorb these costs. The impacts on both facilities have a combined annual economic output of $16.6 billion. And the total annualized cost for the proposed rule would only be $79 million. And so this represents only 0.48% of their total output. And so another option that the refineries could use would actually be passing on these costs to consumers, which would result in a minimum wholesale gas price increase. But even then, Chevron could recover the rule cost with a 0.01 per gallon increase, and PBF could recover the rule with a 0.02 gallon increase. And so these minimal gas price increases are well within normal annual gas price fluctuations and will most likely have a negligible impact on consumption. Thus, refineries have multiple economically viable options for complying with this rule without requiring any job losses. So additionally, in the past, refinery upgrades, including wet gas scrubbing installations, have not only not caused job losses, but they've actually been associated with an increase in jobs. Between 2007 and 2008, LA refineries were required to comply with increased FCCU standards. The requirements included various abatement measures, including partial wet gas scrubbing installation systems. And so during this period, employment across Los Angeles refineries increased by 7.3%. Since 2014, the total refinery employment across Contra Costa refineries has remained stable, and this unfortunately doesn't include job losses due to COVID-19. But procurement and installation of wet gas scrubbers would actually yield thousands of engineering, construction, and other installation jobs. Upwards of 4,600 jobs between the two refineries are estimated. And these would be regional community supporting jobs that would be created through the passing of this proposed rule.
So, yes, if you don't mind me interjecting one more time, just to sort of help people understand the arguments that the PG&E or Chevron and PBF are making. They're essentially saying it's going to cost consumers up to 2 extra cents per gallon if we were to follow these rules, and that's going to be so catastrophic for our profits because we would lose about less than half of a percent of our total annual revenue. And so that would lead to massive job losses, and therefore we really can't comply with this rule, so we're pushing against it. So that, based off of the the numbers that you've been throwing, it would like you said, cut into maybe 0.5% of their annual profits. And if they pass that on to the consumers because they want to keep those profits, it might end up being an extra penny or two at the gas pump for people.
Exactly. Thanks for going a little more depth on that. So another argument that the refineries were pushing was that wet gas scrubbers will use too much water and will simply pass the pollution into the wastewater. So this is the part I got to comment on. And in actuality, the amount of water that wet gas scrubbers would use is relatively small and will not have a serious environmental impact. In terms of environmental impacts, water diversions usually range somewhere between the thousands of acres per feet to millions of acres per feet. And in comparison, the water amount that would be used by a wet gas scrubber is somewhere between 0.4 to 1.6 acres feet per day. So without any additional recycling, wet scrubbing represents only 2% to 7% of daily water use at these refineries. And full recycling of the water volume that wet scrubbing could use would represent only 2 to 7% of the water volume that one refinery already recycles. But more importantly, while water conservation should be considered and should be practiced, it really shouldn't be prioritized over the health of our communities. Choosing not to implement this rule under the guise of water conservation, it disregards the communities that are directly impacted, and it continues to threaten their health. And so finally, the last argument that the refiners were pushing was that this rule would not actually reduce pollution by much Bay Area wide. And this just really isn't true. The rule would cut particulate matter 2.5, which is one of the largest sources of particulate matter at these refineries, by nearly 70%. This rule would also advance environmental justice communities. People of color are unjustly and disproportionately exposed to these emissions. And so while these benefits would mostly be concentrated in these communities, the benefits would also still extend to the entire East Bay because 1 million residents are breathing in these air pollutants.
So yeah, thank you for going through all these different arguments that really, when you break them down, don't hold any water, if we're going to use a metaphor for water. But out of all of these, which do you think was actually think we're going to have the rule? With all these missing arguments, did you think the rule is actually going to pass? Because if you don't actually break these down, you say, well, job loss is really important. It's going to be very expensive. You hear the numbers 79 million, you think, oh, that actually is a lot of money. But when you counter it, compare it to how many billions they make per year, 79 million is really a drop in the bucket. Like I said, half of 1%. Did you get any concerns about them being convincing to the board and possibly undermining this rule?
Definitely. So going into the public hearing, I was really confident because, I had all of these facts laid out in front of me. And so I was like, oh, reading these, obviously, how could the Air District not agree to this proposal and not vote to pass the rule? But as I was listening to all these people come out from these refineries and talk about how concerned they were about the potential of losing their jobs, that's what was making me really anxious throughout the hearing. And I just didn't know how the Air Board was going to rule when it's people coming to them, asking them or telling them that they're afraid they're going to lose their job and please save my job for me. And so when it's framed in that specific way, I was really concerned. And the whole time I was just very anxious to hear what the board had to say.
Yeah. So you kind of preluded earlier saying that this was a success, a victory, right? Because the rule eventually passed. But how did the board reach this decision to get to that point?
Yeah, it was actually really interesting because we weren't expecting such a large support from the board on this rule. And so it was really crazy to see some of the board members change their votes real time at this hearing. The board actually ended up being really mad that these refineries were basically going for profits in front of people. And they were even more mad that the refineries were threatening these jobs at the cost of refusing to provide cleaner air for their workers. And so the board just eventually concluded that their job and the reason they're there is to create a healthier air for people. And so they passed the rule 19-3. And these refineries, therefore, have to reduce particulate matter from their FCCUs within 5 years.
Yay. Yeah, no, this so folks who are in this movement and in this work, and even people who may be hearing it for the first time, the significance of this success really can't be understated, because it did take a wide coalition of people all across the Bay Area, different communities, people who cared about jobs, as well as people who cared about health, respiratory illnesses, people who cared about the environment. As Shelby said, Sierra Club came in. Communities for a Better Environment. It was just a broad, very strong coalition of grassroots, as well as longtime large orgs who were involved in pushing this forward and just fighting against all the misinformation. So if any of you are interested in wanting to learn more about the details of this work, the power behind community activism, you can look at CBE, Communities for a Better Environment. They have a number of fact sheets out there, but it really was. Both of these cases, both the Aaron Brockovich case against PG&E, as well as this rule 6.5, reducing particulate matter emissions from these oil refineries, really do speak to the importance of community activism and community lawyering. On the one hand, you can have the law on your side, but it really, a lot of the success comes down to, as you saw with the board, hearing from people coming in and giving giving their thoughts and comments. Shelby got to play her role in that, and that's something that's open and available to everyone. You don't have to be a law student. In fact, if you don't know, most rules and laws, before they're pushed or published in the country, in California as well as nationally, have to go through what's called a notice and comment period. And so it sounds boring and dry, and oftentimes it is if you don't care about the issue and you're not passionate, but you really should, because it usually can impact your life and environment. And during this period of time, the public gets to read all of the official documents behind the potential decision. So Rule 6.5, the Air District Board of Directors, they made available their documents, what they were and how they, to be able to make their decisions, and had hearings and opportunities for people to submit comments, either written, so letters and things of that sort, and then essentially oral testimony, which Shelby provided, where people can speak up and say, this is why this rule is important to me. This is why you should pass it. Let me refute some of the, the talking points that the other side had. As we heard just now, Chevron and PMF also had their own share of people who came in, a lot of workers who said, well, my jobs are going to be threatened. And they probably really believe that if they were told from their employers, hey, if we have to cut into our profits, we're going to have to lay you off because we don't want to lose 0.5% of our annual profits. So those workers probably, did feel threatened about this rule because they were told information that it's either profit or your own job. So having communities come in and support and say, well, no, this is really being blown out of proportion in terms of the economic impact this is going to have. And it's so much more important to preserve the health of the workers who are there as well as the community members. And so it takes that collective action of regular everyday people, whether they're involved in the law or not, paying attention to these sorts of rules, giving public comments, giving their testimony, and sometimes providing information that wasn't being addressed by other people. So Shelby, as she mentioned, got to talk about the water impacts with this case, which it didn't seem like anyone else was doing. So, that's such a crucial thing to keep in mind, that when you give comments and things of this sort, you might be providing information to the decision makers where they otherwise might not get that information. And even if you are adding, saying something else than someone else was added to the overall statement, it gets to amplify the voice. If you hear, 50 people or 100 people are saying the same thing, this is important, we need this to protect our health, it's very powerful for the decision makers versus just one person who says, by the way, maybe this would be important to pass. So I just wanted to emphasize that, and the fact that community activism, both with Rule 6.5 as well as with Aaron Brockovich case, we heard Aaron Brockovich was not an attorney. She was working at a law firm, so she knew about the law, but she wasn't an attorney, so she wasn't out there suing people. She didn't necessarily know all the legal ins and outs. She was just somebody who was noticing things weren't right and decided she was going to use the information she had to do something about it. So it happens so often. We live in communities where we suspect something isn't right with the water or with the air or with a factory that's working, operating in our communities. You notice patterns of illnesses or things that don't seem normal. And if you take the time to investigate, you can often uncover something that's far more complicated that could lead to success and cleaning up the environment if you can build momentum around that. I wanted to also add, just based off of my bio, you heard I do a lot of work around environmental justice here at Santa Clara University, but also as a member of the National Lawyers Guild and just as a member of the public who cares about the environment, and the environment as broadly defined as where we live, work, play, and pray. So it includes all living beings within that environment. And as a lawyer and attorney, community lawyering ends up becoming a very important part of the work that I do. And community lawyering, being distinct from you might call traditional lawyering, is where communities work in partnership with lawyers. So it's not a lawyer swooping in, saving the day, filing the lawsuit, and then leaving, but really trying to leave the community stronger and more empowered than before they arrived. So we saw that with Aaron Brockovich. In Aaron Brockovich's case, unfortunately, PG&E had the money and they were able to literally buy the opposition. They were able to buy the homes and properties that were contaminated, had exposure to the contaminated water to sort of quiet things down. But if you see here with Rule 6.5, Chevron wasn't really able to do that. So they had a very strong, broad-based coalition of people who were pushing back. And so with the lawyers, they were able to, get their public comments, strengthened and make sure they could identify all of the weaknesses of the misinformation campaign, and be able to successfully get the board of directors to pass this rule. So one thing I forgot I was supposed to mention at the beginning of this talk, I am part of the Environmental Justice and Common Good Initiative here at Santa Clara University, and the organization actually co-sponsors today's Google presentation, Google very important presentation. It's a group of faculty here at Santa Clara who care about environmental justice and the common good, and do research and advocacy around it. So I work with faculty in the law school with Simeng Yang, who was part of the EPA under the Obama administration, and we work together to promote environmental law and justice advocacy projects and research. And so there's one thing, one of many things that you can take away from this evening's talk is that so much more support needs to happen on the grassroots level. A lot of the community groups are aware of what's happening in their communities, but might not have the technical expertise. They might not have the time to come to these hearings. They might not have the legal expertise. So community or schools like Santa Clara that has a lot of resources, has a lot of well-educated people, and students who are interested and want to learn more, it's a great opportunity to combine the need of what communities have to fight environmental injustice, and then the resources that law students and undergraduate students can provide through their classes, through their research, and applying some of what they're learning in class to these live issues. So if there's anything you can do as a takeaway is, help promote and encourage the administration here at the university to support environmental justice activities and actions. You can, ask to try to get support for the environmental justice, the law and advocacy portion of the Environmental Justice Initiative. I've worked with undergraduate students in the past year doing research on a lot of these issues here in the Bay Area. And so we'd love to be able to support more student involvement in public comments, in educating the community about what is misinformation and what sort of impacts these environmental issues can have.
Yes, so just going off of what Zaya said, so if you're kind of wondering where you can go from here, like Zaya said, talk to Santa Clara. If you're interested in working with environmental justice groups, advocating for environmental justice groups, first become an advocate for yourself and tell Santa Clara that you're interested in doing this and you'd like to see them get involved with it. Because really the more student interest you show, the more it shows Santa Clara that there are people that really do want to do this work and they should be supporting their students in doing this work as well. And so even though there's been little promise on the chromium-6 litigation after the Superior Court invalidated the standard, according to Aaron Brockovich, the largest emerging contaminant in our nation's water is actually PFOA right now. And I'm not going to get really into it at all just because we don't have time, but I would implore you to check out some of these links. The Environmental Working Group has some really good information. There's also resources that can tell you about the quality of your water. And then you can also contact your representative and urge them to support PFAS reform. And then always you can email me as well. My email is there at the bottom. And thank you guys so much for coming to Turn. See if you have anything else to say, please add. But I'll conclude my talk there.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. I didn't put my email up, but it's my first initial zbomani@sbu.edu. So you can also reach out to me as well.
Well, I want to thank both of you for this really great session, and what a reminder that we can use the university as a laboratory to study this, and also as a place to put some good pressure on people to understand that this really should be more centered in the university. It's so aligned with the mission of Santa Clara University and the Sustainability Strategic Plan, and the group Environmental Justice and the Common Good Initiative is doing such amazing work and showing such great leadership, and is such a great coalition. A big thanks to Shelby and Zaya for this beautiful session, really informative. I wrote down so many notes, and I'm all ready to go in there and fight. So thank you so much for the great thoughts. And I love the idea that Shelby was sitting there witnessing our elected officials and some appointed people changing their votes in real time. I mean, if there is anything that says to me our democracy is still functioning, it is that we can, with the proper information, getting to the people who have those positions to vote in the Assembly or the California Senate, that we can see how the right information will produce the best result. And so counteracting all of that wrong information seems to me to be, one of our great.
Thank you.